started with the pieces, just to mention that the second piece was for piano, cello, flute, various flute, three flutes, alto, piccolo, during the piece, and soprano, of course.
What language was that?
It's Greek.
Oh.
It's Greek, the singer was Greek, the poet was Greek, the most famous Aphrodis. I'm Greek. So, the performers are not Greek, some variety. But yeah, because of that, I think, and the theme came with revolution. But also because me and the poet were Greek, you can pick up rhythmical elements, simpler or more complicated. Decisions about the voice, like for example in the third miniature, being almost constantly in one tone, in one pitch. And also melodic material that it is related to Greek tradition. So it did affect that. We had that in mind when we were creating the piece. So yeah, I mean, talk a lot about the music, but maybe it would be better. I need to ask some questions if you have, and not get the technicalities myself.
Greek words.
It's a lot of words. A lot of words. The piece is called Under Constraints, which in Greek is hypoperiorισμόν. And it has to do with being constrained in many different levels, socially, politically, militarily, personally, emotionally. So it has to do with the constraints you're in and with the breakthrough, the revolution you have against it. So it's quite a long poem, but the whole idea is around this, around breaking the constraints, either set it to you, either yourself set it.
I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed it, partly because I really felt as if there was a strong sense of melody running through it. And I know it sometimes seems that modern composers are very deliberately trying to write anything but a melody. And I thought you really beautifully managed to combine being, on the one hand, interesting, not just a tune, but still maintaining some sense of melody in there. And so it actually sounded like something that, as a singer, you could imagine singing. And yeah, thank you.
Well, melody in general is something, you know, it's when you are trained as a musician, as a composer, you know, after some time, things that you find melodic, you're somebody else's, like, which melody? You're like, come on, hear all the shapes. So it's a tricky thing. I think the song has this kind of melodic element quite strongly because of the poem itself. To be honest, it's really important when you are setting words on an already written poem. It has a great effect on you. You can read it and it's something that, you know, you just need to sing it. You need to write it like that. And if you go over that just to be different, then, you know, it's fake to some extent. So sometimes, you know, I might compose a piece for Voiceworks that I'm going to search for the melodic line, or from the beginning to the end will be melodic. And it's to a great effect, the poet, the collaboration, the procedure, and the singer, of course.
How did you collaborate with the poet?
Here in this piece, I was actually, I've written the piece quite freely because of the distance. I was living here, and he was in Greece. But we had the same kind of theme to work around. So we created party material separately, and we exchanged bits and bobs. You know, me mostly media, a few recordings, and him sending me the poems he'd written. They're actually, it's a set of 10, but the miniatures are 5. We decided to do 5. But it was a progress that wasn't parallel. But I could say, for example, when with Stephen we did Voiceworks 4 years ago, we were all the time meeting and all the time exchanging ideas. This song was a bit more in the distance, and because of the actual distance itself. So yeah, I think that mostly the creation had to do the collaboration. It was the thing there, and it was the striking. The poem is quite striking and visually, so it's kind of leading you rhythmically to some extent.
What really struck me in the first piece was the I kind of got a sense of narrative and a really visual sense of what was going on. Are those things that you kind of, when you're conceiving a piece, is that what's going on in your head?
Well, I should have said that in the beginning, but I'm to present something. The piece is called Meteora. Meteora is a Greek word, which means suspended rocks in the air. So, coming from the Ages. Now this is a setting in Greece, and it's a setting that I visited a few years ago. And it is a plain land, and you see massive rocks going actually like spreading skyscrapers in a city to some extent. They're really massive, and on top it has monasteries. Quite exciting. And it's called like that, so it had to do with that. And it had to do, and subconsciously, because I had the thing, I had this visual. It's not narrative in the extent of, it's really abstract the way you actually say a story, even if you want consciously to have a program in it. So it was the impact of the place itself, and it was the Meteora. You can see that it has 3 sections. In the first section you have a constant high pedal note constantly being there, which kind of presents this suspension. And then the middle section is massive and so it's not program music, but definitely it has this element seen, somewhere in your head when you write, kind of being driven by that. If it exists, if it was written in numbers, then it would be something else.
I kind of had that feeling as well, that it was chilling. The music was really chilling, but I could also imagine it. I know this is like really kind of whatever, but I could imagine it in a movie. I could really imagine it like as some sort of horror suspense with these big crescendos and stuff. My heart was actually going, whoa, 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 what's going on here? It felt like something was happening all the time, and it was building and building, and yeah, I kind of had that sort of same sort of narrative sense. But I understand what you mean about the suspense, and it was, yeah, I found it really good.
To some extent, I had in mind that because it's a place that it's massive, and you have the ability to kind of only see that, the plane and the, so it had to do with that.
Can I ask what instruments were missing from the first one?
There's the oboe and the horn
Okay.
that were missing. So we had the trombone and trumpet. The horn was missing, so some brass chords, they are thinner than supposed to, and some material with the oboe, especially in the top, some striking elements. For example, the baron and the oboe had some climbing up that is missing. But to some extent, I think it fulfills to a big percentage what I wanted to show. But obviously, I wish in the future to have the opportunity to get a proper performance. And by the way, it's the first movement. There's 2 more still in progress. But,
it's very interesting that you pick up on, it seems to be a consensus that this is music which is, you feel like you are being communicated to. Something is being communicated, even if you're not entirely sure what that is. And it's interesting that we tend to want to, in a sense, because we live our lives temporally and narratively, we tend naturally to want to think about narrative. But it's quite interesting sometimes to think about how sometimes when we experience music, it's not, we experience sort of sense of movement or changing colour or other kinds of dynamic other than just things happening in time. Does that make sense? Sometimes it feels like, yes, there are events that are happening successively, and then others there are things sort of deepening or brightening, or which might not be quite so, temporal, I suppose. But that, I think your music is particularly good as an example of that, because it's not always, the sense of time moving forward isn't uniform You know, there are moments when it seems to be suspended or still, and then but there are other. It's as if other things on the fader are being moved up or down or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, also I was thinking about the voice. I mean, I wasn't looking for narrative, I wasn't looking to put it together that way, and it didn't do that. That's not what I heard. But what I was amazed and really interested by was the voice in the song, where what it made me want to think about was what voices do. I mean, the experience of the encounter with voice, rather than thinking about placing that voice in a role or in a narrative or in a shape that makes sense of the voice. What I had a sense of was a really powerful sense of a very, how can I put this, of a mouth that was channeling a kind of torrent continuously, and it didn't let up. I mean, so that what I understand then, listening to you, that you are narrativizing it within that notion of revolution and breaking through constraint. I can see how that conceptually is working. But what I was getting was the extraordinary thing, especially for those of us who are not used to being in proximity with singers. What we're not listening to, I mean, speaking personally, if you're not trained, isn't necessarily the role. You're not necessarily hearing the role at all. What you're hearing is pure voice, sound, coming from breath and, you know, extraordinary. And I love to get that kind of moment of encounter, that because it isn't actually tameable, all of it, within narrative or role. It's the untameable bit that I can hear you, that is on the edge of, and I loved listening to that for that reason. I mean, I then probably want to try and make sense of it, but just at the point where you can't, actually if you're in an audience, is the bit where you get goosebumps, or you feel the uncanny bit of it, or the, you know, the heartbeat thing. There's something really extraordinary about voice that does that, I think. And some poetry plays with that, actually. And the idea of what the, if you like, the, how would I put it, sense material, the kind of, the sound volume. It plays with, you know, tuning that in and out and the frequencies of that and letting that rip, and some doesn't. So listening to sound, you can get that in a poem. Sometimes you just get it through the ear when you're reading it. So anyway, that was fascinating for me to hear.
But it's funny, for us, we often talk about it being more important to tell a story than the sound that you make, because we're all used to hearing singing all the time. Don't concentrate too much on your technique, just tell the story. We'd rather see a good performance than a technically perfect performance. So it's really interesting to hear that you just love the sound of the voice.
It's not about, I suppose it's not about technical perfection, that's not the way. I'm just listening to sound.
Yeah.
I'm listening to a voice being like a soundbox. I mean, a body being a soundbox.
I think the Martian anthropologist exercise is always a really good one to do. Just think, you know, if a Martian landed in the middle of your final recital, who knew nothing, not only about, you know, classical singing, but indeed about the culture which that spawned this activity, what would they notice? What would they respond to? You know, what were the features of it? Well, they'd see things going on, and they'd see someone standing there, and they'd hear a variety of sounds. But you know, whether they would necessarily connect the kind of the semantic meaning of the text with what you were doing and what they were seeing, I mean, it's a moot point.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Because Voiceworks brings out your inner Martian.
But in a sense, it's good to realise that all those things are sensory pleasures. They're not incidental. They are actually completely part of performing. And you know, you can play with it or not. You can just operate completely within the convention that you've been, as it were, acculturated into by learning singing and to be a recital artist. Or you can just take a step back from that completely and think, well, you know, just at the purely sonic and sensual level, what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you.